Former President Trump's second impeachment trial is now officially in the hands of the Senate. House impeachment managers are now tasked with proving Donald Trump's role in sparking the deadly January 6th insurrection on Capitol Hill. A two-thirds majority vote in the Senate is needed to convict Mr. Trump, which requires at least 17 Republicans to vote alongside Democrats. For more insight on this, let's bring in CBS News legal contributor Rebecca Roiphe. Rebecca, good to see you. So let's talk about this. The House delivered the article of impeachment to the Senate last night. Walk us what happens over the next 2 weeks before the trial starts.
Right. So the senators will be sworn in where they swear to do impartial justice. They're sworn in as jurors. And after that, they will vote on resolutions that essentially set the procedures for the trial, how long the opening arguments will be, whether there'll be witnesses, how many, how much time will be given for them, whether there'll be depositions. All of that can be done at one shot, or they can split it up and make some of the decisions now and some of the decisions later.
So Democrats are said to be sort of split over whether or not witnesses are necessary to prosecute a case against the former president. Of course, there's a lot of video out there, and you could certainly tell the tale or build the case without witnesses. And in this case, we have senators who are also jurors in this trial, in a way, and they're also witnesses because they were in the Capitol when all of this went down. How might we see evidence and witness testimony presented in a case like this?
Right. So one of the things to realize about the impeachment trial is even though it uses the word trial, it's really not a traditional trial. It's a political proceeding more than a legal proceeding. And the Constitution really doesn't provide a huge amount of detail. So a lot of it gets determined by the majority of the Senate. And so one thing to keep an eye on is the majority of the Senate has obviously switched from the last impeachment trial from the hands of the Republicans to that of the Democrats. So they will have a little bit more control this time over how and when the case is presented. And that can have a lot of impact, I think, because through these procedural rules that are usually controlled in a regular trial by a judge, you can very much determine the outcome. And so there are things that might seem weird if you were used to a normal trial, like you don't normally have witnesses who are also jurors. Anybody, if you went down to do jury duty and you said, yes, I'll be a witness in this trial, you would be immediately excused. So things are different, and it's a bit more political theater than it is a legal proceeding, even though it looks very much like a legal proceeding.
So, Rebecca, as you know, Senator Patrick Leahy, rather than Chief Justice John Roberts, will be presiding over this impeachment trial. That won't change the function or how we see it play out on our screens, all right? Just the fact that you have a senator taking over the role that normally the Chief Justice would handle, but he says that since the president is already out of office, he'll delegate that, or the Senate will delegate that to Senator Leahy.
Right. Once again, the Constitution just doesn't tell us everything we want to know. And the Constitution does say that that the Chief Justice presides over the impeachment trial of a president or vice president. But once Trump is out of office and he is no longer the president, the Constitution doesn't state who presides. And Chief Justice Roberts indicated that he wasn't interested in serving in this role again. And so Patrick Leahy has stepped in. Now, the other thing that the Constitution is silent about is how active a role this presiding person has in the proceedings. And so it's a little bit, make it up as you go. And you noticed in the last trial that Chief Justice Roberts stayed pretty much out of things. I mean, he kept control, but he didn't make huge decisions. He didn't break ties. There was nothing. He didn't insert himself into the proceedings. And so one thing we want to keep our eye on is how Senator Leahy approaches this job. He has a lot of leeway in either being a more active participant or standing back. And I think that'll have significance both in terms of how the trial proceeds and also the legitimacy of the trial. Because he is a senator, there's a way in which his role may be questioned in a way that Chief Justice Roberts, as the Chief Justice and a member of a different branch, would not be. So it remains to be seen. My guess is Patrick Leahy would rather sit back and serve that presiding role in exactly that way. But if there's a tie, he's going to be awfully tempted to jump in there and make a decision, especially if it's a question that's important to the outcome of the case.
And the other thing about Leahy is that he voted to impeach the president during the previous impeachment. And so some people he voted to convict, rather. So some people are sort of suggesting it's a wee bit of a conflict. And something else that you pointed out, that without the Chief Justice, it sort of takes a little bit, takes away from the legitimacy of the process. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, again, this is a political proceeding. That's exactly the way that our founders wanted to structure it. And so there's some ways in which we can't avoid it. But that said, it doesn't mean that it's not important to have the trial proceed with certain kinds of protections for the person who's accused. And so, there's both the question of actual legitimacy. Is the former president being afforded his due process rights? While, it's not like his liberty is at stake, certainly his ability to run for office another time is. So, how fair is this proceeding is going to be a question in the back of everybody's mind. And that, in turn, informs how legitimate the proceedings are. If the outcome is to disqualify him from office, what is the social and political ramifications of that? And all these little things, like Patrick Leahy presiding and being a senator and having voted previously, does that undermine the impact if there were a decision to disqualify? And, it remains to be seen. I think that, one thing to keep an eye on is how does Patrick Leahy, how does Senator Leahy approach this job? And, does he approach it as a presiding justice might, or is he in it, fighting on the floor as a senator would, or as the senators did last time?
So, Rebecca, as you know, a growing number of GOP senators say they oppose the impeachment because holding a trial for a former president, they say, is unconstitutional, despite having been initially critical of former President Trump's role in inciting violence at the Capitol. I guess the question becomes, if they are objecting to the impeachment because they feel that this impeachment is unconstitutional, what happens as the evidence is introduced and not just the senators who were in the Capitol when the insurrectionists overran it describe and show video, and we see testimony from law enforcement as to the people who've been arrested, and as that plays out on our screens, how much then, and I know you keep saying it's a political, it's sort of political in nature and not, legal in nature the way it would be for an ordinary citizen who had to who was being indicted here. But what is that what kind of a message does that send if you're watching all of these things play on your screen and you're a senator and you're a juror in this impeachment, but you still are objecting because of what you say is the unconstitutionality of the entire proceedings?
Right. I mean, so there are factual questions and there are legal questions involved here. And, both are important. The question is, which do you want to focus on? And I think the Democrats very much want to focus on the facts here because, the facts are dramatic and alarming. Whatever you think of the president's role, certainly I think, the vast majority of Americans would condemn the violence. And so, the images of the violence juxtaposed with this president it's a very convincing case. So then the Republicans who might feel that, even if they aren't fully with President Trump and they are concerned about his behavior here, they might feel that, an impeachment, a conviction here would tear their party apart. So there might be a practical reason to focus on the legal question of the constitutionality of impeaching or trying a former president. Now, there are legal arguments on both sides, and we will see those play out during the proceeding. Whether it's, how exactly it happens depends on the procedure. But in my mind, the bulk of that evidence really does favor that this is legitimate to impeach a former official. Both the purpose of the Constitution, the text of the Constitution, and its history tend in the direction toward allowing this happen. But again, this is going to be a huge issue at trial. Both the factual question of whether the president actually incited this mob and the legal question that I think the Republicans would like us to focus on, which is whether or not it's legitimate, in fact, to have a trial of a former official.
Rebecca, thank you so much. I mean, we talk about what's the precedent. There is no precedent. We haven't had, a president be impeached twice. We haven't had a president who's out of office be impeached. We are writing the book now. We are creating the precedent now. We're witnessing it anyway. Rebecca Roiphe, always good to have you here to guide us through it.
So nice to be here.